I'm your host, Brent Feldman, and we're back with another episode of Mix and Matchbox. Today, I am joined by Dia Bondi. She is a leadership and communications coach, as well as an author. Hi, Dia. How are you doing?
Hi, Brent. I'm so much better. I know we've been back and forth because I had to reschedule a few times, and I'm so glad to finally be here.
Yay! I am glad you're better as well. I'm glad we're finally getting a chance to jump into these questions. So I'll start right off. You've taken the world of auctioneering and turned it into a framework for leadership and negotiation. Can you share the moment that you realized that those skills were translatable beyond just the auction stage?
Yeah, I was about 30 auctions into it. And to give people a sense of like, why was she auctioneering? What is that? So I have been a leadership communications coach for like over 2 decades. And I work with mostly VC-backed founders and senior leaders in organizations to help them really speak powerfully at really important, what I think of as like clutch moments. And I put myself on sabbatical. For those of you who are experiencing a little bit of burnout, go ahead and put yourself on sabbatical. I did that for a year. I did 2 things. I did The Artist's Way cover to cover. And I also went to auctioneering school kind of as a bucket list item and learned to auctioneer like for fun because I had been invited to be the auctioneer for my kids' preschool fundraiser a decade before. And when I got home, I was like, this is not a job for me. I was like, what is this? And I decided to turn it into what I think of as an impact hobby. And so I started doing fundraising auctioneering for women-led nonprofits and nonprofits benefiting women and girls. And about 30 auctions into it, I was coming home from a conference related to entrepreneurship. And I was laying in my bed, kind of daydreaming about what had happened, reviewing what had happened during the day. And I was like, all this stuff, all these entrepreneurs I work with, they're making asks right and left for fundraising, for, their first whale of a client, their new partnership, engagement from their audiences, opportunities, to get in front of audiences, et cetera. It's like, it would be so cool if I could teach somebody let them experience what I've experienced standing in front of an audience and asking directly and in a speedy way for money or donations or a quick back and forth negotiation. But I don't want to stand up an auctioneering school for entrepreneurs. Actually, I just want them to ask like an auctioneer. And I was like, wait, what does that mean, Dia? And I wrote it down. If we ask like an auctioneer, what does that mean? And I drew the first little graph of what that means. And that really kicked off this project to try to pull the lessons, not just the skills, but the lessons and useful mental frameworks over to business to help entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, ambitious professionals ask for more and get it. That's a long answer, but that it'll give you context of why is this lady going to auctioneering school?
Why is this a thing? No, but that's great. Did they also teach you how to speak really fast too?
No. It's actually no, because this is always a misnomer that it's not actually fast. It's where what's called a chant is sounds like a chant because where you put your breath is not where you would in punctuation, number 1. And number 2, you can use little filler words that are just sounds. They're not actually words. So you're not talking any faster. You're just mumbling in between. So no, I did not develop a strong chant. Also, because I do fundraising auctioneering for big galas, like people who go to 1 or 2 a year. If I were using a regular cattle auction chant, nobody would know what they were bidding on and how much they were paying.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, it's interesting. And the filler words make it a lot of sense. I don't know if anybody remembers the DOS effects, hip hop artists, 90s, big in the 90s.
Yes. Are you kidding? I'm a 90s girl.
Yeah, there we go. So lots of filler words. Sounds like you're saying a lot. Actually,
gonna buy, gonna buy. Yeah, come on.
Yeah. Maybe the next thing is rap career. Is that it?
No, not at all.
No.
My next career is a 2-bedroom cabin in the mountains and no landline.
That sounds ideal. Well, cool. Well, I guess in your book, you talk about the zone of freaking out, or ZoFO. Why is stepping into discomfort so crucial for asking boldly, and how do leaders know when they're in the right zone?
Well, okay. So first, let's talk about what the ZoFO actually is.
Cool.
So what I saw in auctioneering, so my clients come to me very often when they have a really critical communications moment coming up. And inside of that, there's usually an ask, right? You hear the term call to action. Well, it's basically an ask. And they're asking for, they're asking for headcount and budget and fundraising and somebody come on their board and et cetera. Okay. And most of the time when I work with somebody, we start with like, what is it that you're asking for? So we can figure out what story we need to tell to make that make sense. Usually the way in which we identify not just what to ask for, because we usually know that, but how much to ask for is by asking ourselves the question, what do we think we can get? Like, oh my God, there's no way. Think about folks listening today. Maybe you're a marketing consultant yourself and you're like, there's no way I could find a client if I added a zero. And in that way, you're sort of designing your asks based on what you think you can get a yes to. And that's not what we do in auctioneering. In auctioneering, we actually can't sell anything until we get a no. Meaning, if I opened a bid at $100, somebody raised their paddle in the air and I said sold, I never would have known what I could have gotten. I have to actually ask enough in order to get a no. And once I get a no from the room, I know, I've hit the maximum possible number for this, and I sell it for right beneath that. Now, in the world, we are not often in competitive bidding situations, but we do have the opportunity to design our asks based on what do I think is going to get me a no. But we don't do that because everything above a mostly guaranteed yes, based on a bunch of our assumptions about what somebody will say yes or no to, we don't ask for, because that size of an ask puts us in the ZoFO, puts us in the zone of freaking out, because we don't know what kind of answer we're going to get.
Yeah.
We want guarantees, man. And I understood. So if the question is, how do I get into the ZoFO, and how do I know I'm in the right zone? Your body's going to tell you. You're going to get that gross feeling in your stomach that tells you like, you're going to break it.
Yeah.
You're going to get
fight or flight.
How dare you? That's a sign you're challenging your own assumptions about what you think you can get. And the second thing is you're going to tactically be able to answer the question, here's what I think I can get a yes to, and here's what I think they'll totally say no to. So if you're making an ask that's somewhere above what you think you're going to get a yes to, touching what you think you'll get a no to, or even just experimenting with something in between, you're in the right zone. And the chances are you're going to surprise yourself at the answers you get.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, so some people actually just struggle with the fear of rejection. So how do you coach through coach high performing executives to reframe no into something productive rather than a dead end? And I think this is something where people kind of, they get themselves into a mindset that, no is a bad word. And I know from the sales side, there's a lot of people that take no as that's the goal. I need a no so that I can move forward. But how do you coach people through that?
So to be fair, the high level executives that I work with, it's much more dynamic than like, I'm afraid to get a no. Like that's not usually where the rub is. Sometimes it is it's much more nuanced. It's the folks that are worried about, the high level executives I work with are not very often afraid of rejection. They're afraid more of, they're not, and afraid isn't even the right word. What they get destabilized about is around being able to speak a powerful story that sets their leadership voice at the right elevation, that establishes rapport, keeps things going. They are making an ask, but it's the ask isn't, I'm afraid to make it. It's like, help me understand how this is going to work.
It's clarity.
It's clarity. It's about like coming in at the right elevation. It's about breaking. I wouldn't call it rejection. The thing they get worried about is breaking credibility.
Okay.
How do I make a big, huge ask to my board and not look like and not damage my credibility because it's so outlandish?
Wow. What breaks that credibility for people?
Oh, well, look, if you go to your board and you say, I need $100 million to build out this part of the business, and they're like, that is so devoid from reality. Like, who do you, the stories they're having to put together are very sophisticated. I mean,
Yeah.
I work with some of the biggest brands in the world, and yeah, so there's that. Where we really get the folks that I encounter that are more afraid of rejection are folks who are small agency, owners who maybe recognize that every deal they get could make or break the next quarter. The stakes feel really high individually. Folks, early to mid career who are trying to really put a piton in the, in the rock around their careers. Those are the ones where rejection feels really important. It's not the conversation is less about credibility.
Yeah.
So if that fits your profile, for those of you who are listening, you're a small agency owner, you're starting out in your career, or you're running a small or medium-sized practice, or you're running for office. I don't know what you're doing. That could, rejection, especially in the early stages of that, can feel really, really painful. And the potential of it can make us really make safe asks. So the things that I learned from the world of auctioneering that didn't come from auctioneering school or the formal practices. It's just when I did it over and over again, I just realized some stuff, that can help you like make the ask, even though it stings, are the following. Do you want to hear a few of them?
Yeah. Oh, hit me.
So one is that I really realized that people are so irrational. And if you don't like that, because, we're a data-driven organization around here, I got that. But people, like individuals, I saw over and over again that I would sell something for what I had it was so off my expectation of how it was going to go that I really realized that, like, not only are they irrational, but like their rationale for what they'll say yes or no to is not your rationale for what you'd say yes or no to. So stop shopping from your own wallet. Like, you have no freaking idea what people will say yes or no to. Maybe you have a ballpark, you've done your research, but ultimately you have to ask and find out. So if you remember that people aren't coming at the ask from the same perspective you are, they're not placing the same meaning on a dollar sign or a scope of work or a way in which you engage that you are making meaning out of, it can sometimes loosen that ask's grip on you, and you can just be like, let's go. I have no idea. Their rationale is not mine. Let me just ask and find out.
Yeah.
I mean, I sold a one-night camping trip at a fundraiser, a one-night camping trip for the buyer and 11 of their friends. Granted, it was going to be a glamping trip for $55,000.
But that could change their lives.
We were like, well, it changed our lives. I mean, it was a big deal for our fundraiser, and it was over double what we thought it was going to go for. Sounded totally irrational.
That's awesome. How did you peg that number? How did you land on that? How did you
They
feel
said
like
no. I mean, in a live auction, you open the auction at whatever amount, $10,000. You look for 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. And at auction, two people have got their paddles in the air at 50,000. And I say, how about 55? They both stay up. And I say, well, how about 60? And one goes down. And I say, last call, anybody in at 60? I got nobody, but I got somebody in at 55. And I say, sold to the person that had 55. This is what I mean.
Yeah. And when you started at 10, what was your feeling that drove you like, okay, we're going to start here? Or for anybody else who's thinking about like, this is where and I think it'll go for 25, or I think it'll go for 27.5, like half of that. That where
people out in the business people out in the world are not doing competitive bid. They're not being auctioneers.
Yeah.
But you have to get an estimate that like, okay, I have a small marketing agency or, a legal practice or whatever, and I serve this kind of client, and I recognize that this is changing in the market, and probably this scope of work is going to be rated at $25,000. Seems like that's kind of in market. But then you take into conditions that like the client is super desperate. They're afraid of change. They've worked with you before. You take into all these other considerations, and you're like, well, what if I challenge that assumption that 25 is the right ballpark? I take more into consideration their ballpark, their unique scenario.
Yeah.
And you're like, maybe I put maybe at this time I'm like, I just gave myself a raise and now we're at 40 grand for that scope.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's interesting, just breaking it down in my head really quickly about the 55,000. If there's 11 people there, it's $5,000. You stay in a luxury hotel. That actually, maybe that makes, sense in somebody's reality where you're not pegging your own reality of like, oh, wow, that seems a lot to pay for that for me, myself, and my friends. But in somebody else's reality, that's
100%. But this is why I say you can't shop from your own wallet.
Yeah.
You have to just get in your ZoFO, ask, and find out. And look, you're probably, if you take this advice, if you get the book or listen to the audiobook and you're like, I'm going to try it, there's going to be moments where you get a hard no and that's it. Fine. But, life is long.
Yeah.
Secondly, you're going to ask for more than you ever have before in a circumstance, and you're going to get an instant yes. And you're going to be like, oh no, I failed because I didn't get a no. That's not true. The whole point is that you ask for more than you think you can get. And if you get it, you ended up with more than you would have if you had designed to get a yes.
Awesome. That's great. So you emphasize the difference in the book between price and worth. And how has this understanding that distinction shifted the way that your clients see themselves and maybe their opportunities of deciphering between the two?
Yeah. So that came out of my time on an auctioneering stage because I recognized that like the camping trip, I would never spend $55,000 on a one-night camping trip. I just would not. But it had value for somebody else for reasons I don't know, but it did. I sell at auction, I sell art that is supposed to go for 10 grand and it goes for 4. Like, because somebody in the room valued it at 4. Nobody was in there that valued it for more. So I know that, it's very easy, particular for like consultants and solo practitioners, to sort of we want to get quote unquote paid what we're worth, right? But when we tie up our sense of worth and worthiness with the asks we make, it can really hold hostage the asks we make. Because if I get a no, well, maybe then I'm not worth it. It just means too much. So I think of it more like price, or what somebody will do with you or for you is a way to see what they value and how they value it, not a way to identify or define your own worth or worthiness.
Cool.
And when we can do that, that works again as another reminder of like, we don't have to interpret the answers we get as a definition of our value or our worth. It's just a definition of what somebody else values in that moment. It's more about them than it is about you. And when you do that, again, maybe you can push send. Maybe you can add that extra 0. Maybe you can, you can go to that client and say, I want to do these 3 things at this scope, at this price. And also I want a white paper on the end of this. And I want 5, let's do 5 testimonials and let's do a micro documentary documenting the work that we did. And like, I don't know.
Yeah. There could be a lot, and that is helpful. I think, just also sometimes the simple urge or the ask of people to think about what else could be possible may, help stimulate that idea in their mind that, it is possible. But in particular, and this is where I'd love to get your opinion, because you women in particular often undersell themselves in negotiations. And I feel like, this is something that I'm sure that you have a very, particular viewpoint on, obviously, but what patterns have you observed and what strategies have you seen that truly change the outcomes for women?
Well, I hear this is interesting to me, and it kind of gets me. It's a little rage baity because a couple of things. One is, yes, there are anecdotal and there is old research that said that women don't ask as often or as much. But in 2019, the Women of the Workplace study found that women ask for raises and promotions at equal rate of men and don't receive. And we know in entrepreneurship, especially in the venture space, well, I think right before the pandemic, only 4% of women-led ventures were funded by VC. It backslid over the pandemic. So it's a great question. And the better question to ask is, women are asking, why aren't you writing checks?
Cool. Okay.
Like, what is it about, like, when you hear, when you are the receiver of those requests, granted that the the work is great, the story is compelling, there's a rationale for the request. These are not demands. Like when you feel hesitant or when you feel that how dare she moment or we're not going to invest moment, just like, I'll just invite folks to be like, what's having me say no?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Now, I do think it's important that we invest in women as often as possible because, I'm an LP in a small angel fund, and we have a lot of pitches from health tech organizations, that are addressing women's health, which is, we want more women leading initiatives like that because they're building products that affect a population that they share a body with, share a biology with. So yeah, I mean, I think, and I'll never tell women what to do, that they should ask more, but if they want to, I want to help them ask for more and get it.
That's awesome. That is cool. Well, I guess hopefully this is, on target. It sounds like one of your key principles is, set your reserve. And I've heard this in many different kind of, fashions, and also never split the difference is one that comes to mind of, you want to know when you go into the, kind of negotiating table, where you need to be. And if you don't, then that can be, make it, sort of harder during negotiations to understand your calculus around that reserve. But how can this practice basically help professionals, especially in high stakes situations, whether it's in salary negotiations, fundraising, or boardroom discussions,
Well, look, we often plan to make the ask and forget to plan what happens after it.
Yeah.
So a friend and colleague of mine says, look, when you make a big ask, you got to come to the knife fight, being ready to win and have a plan for when you win. But you also have to have a plan when your requests aren't met. And if people will say like, yeah, but if I ask so big and they get a no, like, what do I do? And if they won't even meet my reserve, what do I do? And I'm like, well, help me understand what your reserve actually is. Like, say it out loud. And when you can ground in that and commit to it, then you can ask yourself, if they can't even meet my reserve, what do I want to do? Mm-hmm. And when you walk into that ask with that in mind and the plan for what happens if you can't get your reserve met, then the ask doesn't feel like a cul-de-sac or a do or die. It feels like a speed bump on your way, to wherever you're going, which isn't to say that you're inflexible and not empathetic and can't, new ingredients can't show up into the conversation. Of course, it's very dynamic, but we want to do a little bit of thinking now so we can plan for how to talk about what our sort of lowest boundary, our reserve is, but also what we want to do if we have to say, thank you so much for engaging with it. It's not something I can say yes to, what your next step is. That's very confidence building.
Ooh.
Going into that conversation.
That's great. Yeah. Of not just, as you mentioned, at the start of not just saying no, but what happens after that of if you were prepared to say no, you're mentally preparing yourself of you can be, I don't want to use the word stronger necessarily in negotiations, but you can at least have a game plan for how you respond to things better. And and that makes it easier to negotiate with a little more heft.
Absolutely. And it also, if it doesn't go your way, it's not the end of the world because you've got that plan. I was teaching a workshop around these ideas a handful of years ago. I teach a 2-hour workshop around this in organizations, and a woman, she's a product leader, and she'd been what I call breadcrumbed for years. You know, she was like, I want to be a people manager. I want to be a people manager. I want to be a people manager. And they were like, next quarter, next quarter, next quarter, next quarter. So she was asking me, what do I do? And I was like, well, what's your reserve? She said, what's that? I was like, well, it's probably a couple things. One is, how much money do you want? Two, how many people do you want to, when you say you want to lead it, you want to be a people leader, what does that look like? 3 people, 20 people, 100 people? Help me understand. And she was like, well, at minimum, 3. I want to lead a team of 3. I have that in my mind, right? I'm like, well, when? And she was like, it's got to be within the next 2 quarters. If it doesn't happen at the end of 2 quarters from now, I'm like, it's got to happen by then. And I'm like, well, there's your reserve. And I was like, now what are you going to do if it doesn't happen? Really, let's not worry about getting it. What are you going to do if you don't get it? if you just continue to get breadcrumbed. And she had this moment where she was like, I'm going to have to go. And it was actually a really wonderful shift for her because she realized, like, I've been hanging on. Like, this will just keep going and going and going and going. And it was very like, she wasn't like, I'm going to have to leave. She wasn't mad about it. She was just like, oh my gosh, I recognize that, like, we will be at an impasse and I have a choice to say, I'm going to be looking for something new.
It almost lifted a weight.
100%. And folks listening, maybe you have that same experience with clients that breadcrumb you. They're sitting in your pipeline forever, or they won't come along with a part of, an aspect of the work you want to do with them. And there's a point where you're like, oh, this might be coming to a natural end.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. It's great that also to think about it, not only in, monetary capacity about what your reserve is, but literally in a time-based capacity too, because sometimes that has just as much impact, if not more, than what the actual money is. And actually the fact that you related it to pipeline was so amazing, because I feel like that's something where sometimes salespeople may have a hard time reconciling that with themselves, of drawing their own lines and trying to be just a little more, not curt necessarily, but strong in the recommendation of like, hey, we have to move forward within this period of time, or why don't we just move on?
100%. And I learned this very early in auctioneering. I remember I was at auctioneering school. It was like me and 100 cowboys in the room, and I was practicing. It was like a couple of days in, and we were finally getting in front of the room. And I remember the auctioneering coach. They're all like national champions, and they do cattle auctions, and like, these are like, the folks that are the real deal.
Yeah.
And I remember our coach was so wonderful. We were broken into smaller groups, and I was auctioning something. We were faking it, right? We were like running scenarios. And there was a point where I was in a competitive bid between two people, and he shouted from the back of the room, "Sell it already, Dia! Like, just say sold. Like, it's done. Nobody else is." My learning there was like, oh, I get to actually control how long the bidding goes on for, how I want to read people's silence. I get to decide when I sell it. If somebody, I am in control, not the room. Yeah. And that is a very useful reminder when I have folks coming to me asking, or in my workshops talking about like, when do I let the breadcrumbing go? I'm like, well, what's your reserve? But also recognizing that you get to decide. It's been sitting in your pipeline too long. You get to decide, this is a dead body at this point.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. And like, actually, wow, it's great because like the further up the chain you realize your own leverage, the better equipped you are to also use that leverage, because like if you were the decision maker, then obviously at that point you're like, oh, I don't just have to be beholden to them telling me no, 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 and then finally give up and quit. I can use that leverage to say, no, this is what I want in this period of time. And this is what I'm prepared to do if you're not willing to be there with me.
Yes. And I will say though, that vibes matter.
Yeah.
I hear the word leverage and the way people talk about it, it's like you're doing something to someone.
Yeah.
And this is not, to me, asking like an auctioneer, the biggest asks that my clients, particularly my founders, make. And, and I'm not sitting in my coaching sessions with them going like, let's ask like an auctioneer, but I borrow from some of the ideas as we craft the asks that they'll make, as we put together the stories that they need to tell. Those asks they make are value creators for everyone. They're not, well, you better do it or else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So leverage it is important to recognize what leverage you have and be in control of the levers that you can pull to create a pace in your business or in your career that is satisfying to you, to move the business in the direction that you want to not have clients and bosses and et cetera breadcrumb you. But I really I really come to it with a perspective of cooperation and value creation.
That's great. Cool. That's helpful. Well, I think it's compelling that you've had so much experience with, like, leaders at companies like Salesforce and Google. What have you learned about how these top leaders are using their voice, not just to communicate, but to truly lead?
I've learned that, and it sort of informs my core philosophy now, that you are your most powerful when you speak from who you truly are, period. So the business of developing a leadership voice is very rooted in what is it that you have to say? What is your core leadership philosophy? What are your operating principles? What perspective do you bring to the business that you're running? How does your voice differentiate from the voice of the business in a way that you can actually bridge nicely to that and people can understand why you. So you are your most powerful when you speak from who you truly are, period. And secondly, that mastery is not about polish. It's about being able to speak more powerfully from the heart. It's about being in control in the moment. And it's very much about being willing to have an impact on others. So that mastery model guides all of the work that I do with my clients, and the core philosophy that you are your most powerful when you speak from who you truly are absolutely matters. When I work with somebody and they want to look at their script together right away, or, talking points or whatever that their product marketers wrote or that they wrote or whatever, I'm like, no, we're putting that down. I'm like, help me why are you here? What brought you here? What are some of the peak moments you've had in your career? What do you think the future of your industry is? Like, I want to get to know them so that then we can look at those scripts and go, where are you showing up here?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to touch on, actually, words that seem like a theme, and maybe you can confirm or deny, but it actually was like conviction or belief, just as much as somebody's like trying to convey things to you. Somebody goes up for $100 million, ask or something like that. There has to be a fair amount of conviction in either their ability to, leverage that, money to do the best things, that money can do. And if they don't, then that ask falls flat. But do you view conviction, belief, just as much as them speaking from the heart? Are those fair words to use, or is there something else you would apply to it besides like something like authenticity or something?
Yeah, authenticity is rough because people don't know what it means and what it feels like. They're like,
that is totally true. Yeah, exactly. I hear people use it all the time, but I don't.
Yeah,
it doesn't have a
it's a
universal.
trap. And I know that, like, I people will say like, oh, my board sent me to work with you because they just want me to like be more authentic. And I'm like, do you know what that means? And people say, absolutely not. I do not.
Yeah.
So, this is sort of a content question. Conviction shows up as an outcome of really understanding your own voice. And part of that is taking what you as a leader do innately and then naming and claiming it such that you can talk about it in a way that's very cogent.
Great.
So, last year I worked with the head of engineering. She was going into an M&A discussion as part of the, like a multi-day set of presentations to the acquiring company. And she was going to, really focus on product. Like, I'm going to walk people through the product so they understand what product they're buying. And I'm like, no, whoa. Here's why. Like, you have product marketers and product managers for that. That's fine. We can have that be part of the story, but they're not just buying your product and how it works. They're buying your engineering leadership. So let's talk about what that is. And she's like, I don't know. I just do it. I have a great team. And I'm like, yeah, but there's rhyme and reason. Let's tease that out. And once she understood, like, oh my gosh, I realized like that is such a core philosophy of mine. It's so innate. I forget, I don't even know how to talk about it because it seems so obvious to me. So, the idea of, and then conviction comes out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's super helpful, to kind of to clarify with those words, because they get murky all the time. And sometimes, authenticity gets thrown around so much that
Terrible.
I'm like, yeah, it's
the other one that makes me crazy, Brent, is like, I want executive presence. And no, I'm not throwing any shade on, folks who do executive presence coaching, but like, people come to me asking for executive presence and they don't know what they're asking for.
Yeah. 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 I hear your words, but do you know what that means? Well, I know that you have helped secure hundreds of millions, in decisions and resources, including Rio's bid for the Olympics, and that is a pretty impressive feat. So, what lessons from those kind of like massive moments can everyday professionals maybe apply in their own asks?
You know what? I'm going to go straight to like self-evaluate around the 6 attributes that I have seen leaders who are really high impact and can help seal deals have. Okay.
Cool.
And so like a very practical way, like folks who are listening you can listen to these 6 and ask yourself, like, how am I doing on those? And then maybe use the one that you're like, that one's a little murky for me. Maybe that's where you go find professional development around it. Would that be useful, Brent?
Yeah.
So one we've talked about here a little bit today. One is that, they're really one attribute of the 6 attributes of I think of as like a clutch communicator is like, you're really good at designing strategic asks that are meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, here's the price and here's the scope, or it's not just like and subscribe, or it's not just support me. How can we help you support me? But you're good at developing very strong strategic asks. One. The second attribute is that you really know your own voice. So if you were to say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, can I say I know my own voice? How you doing there? And what does it look like for you to pursue getting really clear about your own voice in the world as a leader, as a founder, as somebody who maybe has IP that you haven't quite grabbed and named and claimed yet?
Mm-hmm.
The third attribute of, when I think about going from Rio, which was almost 12 years ago that I worked on that project, to today, the third attribute is really about, can you decide to be big in big moments? And that's not about kicking down doors. That's about like, whoa, when I'm in like intense customer conversations, do I shy away from asking the more powerful question? Do I take time to paint a picture, or do I rush to products and features? Like, are you able to decide to be big in those big moments? So those are 3. And then the other 3 are really very tactical. One is that you've got killer setups in your back pocket. Like every powerful communicator I've worked with, has invested in figuring out what the best setup is for their ask. And they have ones that they can kind of go back to over and over again. It's time and thinking on that. And then number 5 is you're really good at bridging well. Some of the best communicators I've worked with, best leaders, I've worked with Nobel Peace Prize winners. I've worked with early stage startup founders who are just super high impact. I've worked with executives. I've worked with social impact leaders, nonprofit leaders, and they're all really good at bridging to the audience and bridging to the initiative they're there to represent. So they don't just say the words tied to their brand strategy, they recognize that, like, I have a distinct leadership voice and I can bridge it and lend it to the venture or the initiative that I'm leading here. And then also dynamically bridge that to what it means to the audience. Yeah. And then the last one is that they just like absolutely prep like a pro. Like, do you kind of phone it in?
Yeah.
Or have you figured out, have you figured out the methodology that is unique to you, that is like, in 15 minutes, I can get ready for a really high stakes communications moment. I know what my prep routine is and I leverage the heck out of it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So those are sort of the main lessons that, like, if you can have all that in play, that's really going to help you have more impact.
That's awesome. Well, this one is kind of backing away from, like, maybe the money aspect, because your approach isn't just about money. Your talks about, 4 types of asks that drive growth. So can you share an example where a non-financial ask transforms someone's career or their business? Or
Sure. So here are the 4 categories. 1 is money. That's pretty obvious. 2 is influence, the kinds of asks that you make that grow your influence in a network, in a domain, in a market, right? The third kind is is about authority. These are the kinds of asks that make you have the decision-making power, write the checks, veto the creative, whatever it is. And then the fourth one is balance, like asks that bring more into balance the work you want to do with the work you're doing, or the products you want to build with the clients you want to have, that bring you more. And you could use the word alignment there.
Yeah.
And sure. So 2 months ago, I was working with a founder who was an alumni of mine. She dialed me up and said, "Hey, I got this big moment coming up." And what it was she has a technology platform, basically a data platform that two different kinds of customers can leverage to help each other be successful. Okay. It's not a marketplace, but think about it like that. You have buyers and sellers. And in her case, she has like certifiers and brands. Okay. And she was prepping to make an ask to build kind of like a governance board in her domain. And she went and made it. And she got all the yeses she wanted. And now she has this stewardship board that's going to help guide the next iteration of her product. Okay. It's also going to expand engagement. It's going to create so much uptake. And she believes that it was an ask. It was really an ask to grow her influence, or her company's influence in the domain, and elevate their relevance to everyone. But when it was over, I asked her, like, how much do you think that was worth? And she said, I think that ask, although it's about engaging both sides of the equation in my business, probably will generate $10 million in value to my organization. That's
cool. Yeah. So the non-financial ask actually turns into being worth significant.
This is what I was talking about, that it's value creation for everybody. People on both sides of her equation are going to get what they want. They're going to contribute and engage in a way they've never done before. It's going to create a lot of value for them. It's going to drive their product and their adoption, for her in the middle, and everyone's winning.
Yeah.
But it was really an ask to grow her influence and authority in her space.
Wonderful. Well, cool. Well, all right. Well, I have one last question for you. So basically, for listeners who want to start asking bigger today, but feel, intimidated usually by those bigger asks, what is the very first step that basically anybody could take to shift that mindset and begin practicing, acting like an auctioneer?
I'm going to go right back to what I shared before, and that is price, or what somebody will do or say yes to, is about what they value and how they value it, not comment or commentary or a way to define your own worth or worthiness. If you can bring that to every strategic ask you make, you're more likely going to push send. You're more likely going to get it out of your mouth. You're more likely going to land an ask in a way that matters to you.
That's great. That's awesome. Dia, this has been amazing. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing some, expert advice, and, helping people with this. What should people look up about you? Any sort of plugs for, obviously we've been talking a lot about the book, visiting you, connecting with you. Anything else that you feel like people should know?
The best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I do have a monthly newsletter called The Shift that people can get and see all the work I do at diabondi.com. The book is, of course, anywhere where you can find it, audiobook and otherwise. And I do for leaders and founders and sort of thought leaders in their space, I do run something called the Transformational Voice Intensive 3 times a year, which is a 2.25-day experience to help you walk into that session going, what is my leadership voice? And walk out with an answer. And you'll find all that at diabondi.com.
That's amazing. All right, great. Excellent. Well, I hope people do. I hope people use those resources. Thank you again for being on the podcast.
So much fun.
Awesome. Well, this has been another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I'm your host, Brent Feldman, and we'll be back soon with more content. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.